we have a similar ethnic background. Mick Catholics from the Northwest. So
yes, that's right. Pacific Northwest. Yeah, I was born in Vancouver. I'm part Anglo though. That's one thing, but I was raised a Mick Catholic. So, and
yeah, well,
I put it live, by the way, before you say anything private, or just so you know, we are live.
well, that's why everyone knows that about me. I'm not shy about it. But one of the things actually that I really appreciate about your work, I know that you don't follow the old faith anymore, or you're no longer consider yourself a Catholic, but you were robbed.
I sort of do, but go on. Yeah,
you were robbed, and that's and one of the reasons you were robbed, of course, is I'm a traditionalist, and so I go exclusively to the old mass. A mass that was very Roman, very, somber, very traditional, very artistic, very, like we're talking Bernini and Mozart and the Dies Irae and all of the patrimony of the Western Church or the Western world, all the painting, and then it got hijacked by your former guest Eric Stryker talked about this on his own program, but the Vatican II was, and particularly Nostra Aetate, the document basically saying that we have to pretend that none of this stuff matters anymore. The distinctions don't matter, but it was all Jews, and
but let's keep this as YouTube friendly as we can as well, right?
But yeah, and so in like fashion, like the aesthetics were destroyed, right? And of the three transcendentals, right? The true, the good, and the beautiful. The only thing that we can actually like objectively even argue about anymore is this aesthetics, is the beautiful. Because how do you dispute a truth claim with someone who doesn't believe in truth?
Right.
How do you dispute?
There are relative views. There is like, I am a Platonist as well, right? So there is the trickiness of actually discerning a truth. I have this talk now lately almost with everybody. I try to eke it in there because it's like, I do believe there are eternal and functional eternal truths, but even they kind of change a little bit. I think almost everything is changeable, and discovering what is true, you still have to do it, and you still have to strongly take your relative view. But a smart man is aware constantly that how difficult it is to say something with certainty of truth. But this is a whole other philosophical thing, apart from what you're saying, which is that we've totally dived into relativism and submerged ourselves in its dark waters, so to the point that there's nothing tangible you can hang on to. And that all Vatican II stuff was definitely a big player in that. So you're saying you go to a Latin mass still, is it? Or are you?
Yes, I do.
Because I was going to that as well, but I still was not getting. There was still a sermon halfway through with a lot of talk about Israel, and there was still kind of. I still see the odd transsexual there, or I see women. Like there was one really good old Northern Irish older guy, and he'd give a great little talk, and he'd give out about Francis, and a bit about feminism and about immigration. It was great, but I'd see like all the older ladies like shaking their heads with rage, like, oh, he'd even say like, really old-fashioned proverbs about like women, wives obeying their husbands or something. You just see these raging women in the seats.
Of course, yeah. Well, and that's the fruit of 100 years of ideological subversion, and you people swim in waters they don't even know they're wet. But to briefly talk about why I'm a big supporter, I've actually read all your books. Read Agon, and I'm a big fan of pulp science fiction, and we can get into that here in a minute. But
great, okay, thanks.
And I reread your wonderful Decline of Western Art book. I reread the chapter on architecture before this, and I have to say I completely agree. Modern architecture all ought to be burned, demolished. But
it will have to be.
Yeah. So you're true, right? And you've got the good, right? And if your idea of the good is trans 8-year-olds, and my idea of the good is something completely different, we can't live together. And and we have. So the only thing that we could kind of even contest upon is the beautiful. And there was that rather disturbing looking Irish gal, who represented Ireland in Eurovision, right? And of course, this is kind of grotesque and kind of bizarre and very, very demonic looking, and it was very disturbing. right? But even there, you can't even really like dispute the beautiful with these people. But what you can do for the average person who doesn't understand, like isn't well read, and this is not any criticism that most people, like it's very strange to spend most of your waking hours contemplating how do you reach people. I'm a thoroughgoing Aristotelian, so I suppose we'll disagree about that. But right, how do you deal with?
Well, it's just that you are shooting yourself in the foot to spend like wax loquaciously for hours and hours about how we can't actually know anything is true. What's the point of even saying anything? But
right,
just like it's just to always add as a caveat that you are reaching for what must be the closest approximate thing to the truth as far as you know it. And that's maybe I'm too much that way, but I just think it's a wise thing to do, unless you are absolutely. There's a few things you can say with total assurance, or even if you aren't totally sure that it's enough, it's related enough to your survival or to what is good, that you just sort of go for it, full tilt. But like talking about absolute, like, because even you said a few things there that I would not necessarily agree with completely. Say, I do consider myself kind of a Catholic, but at the same time, I don't go to Latin Mass anymore for some of those reasons I was saying, like small disagreements, obviously, right? Small disagreements. But actually, we should start off by saying something about the title of this was the suburban thing, because you told me that was a very interesting thing you said, that you had been, I don't know if you're writing about or talking about or just thinking about suburbia and how it
for
is
years,
in fact, yes, we must hear about this, that how it is a sinister force for evil, which I sense as well. And I never heard anybody so far like speak about it so specifically. So I thought that would be an interesting thing for us to talk about. But if you want to preface it with whatever else you're saying about good truth and beauty, I mean, that's a great way to start, because suburbia is a good example of modern building.
Well, so everyone should go to Amazon and pick up Brendan's book about the decline of Western art. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dark Enlightenment. I'm a podcaster and writer chiefly on Telegram. I've got my own Telegram channel. I've written there for several years, and I've been podcasting inside our thing for about a good 10 years, and was active on Twitter before that, but I got banned many years ago and chose not to go back for numerous reasons.
What are the reasons? I mean, a lot of those, like Joseph Jordan went back, and other people.
I don't have time, and I have other projects going, and so
fair enough. Yeah, don't have time. Yeah, that's a good reason. It sucks up. It sucks up your time, and even when you're shadow man and everything else, you still just like, I don't know. It's addictive.
It is, and but I'm an expert on suburbia and and the history of it, and some of the forms it takes, and the problems with it, and there are numerous practicable problems as well as aesthetic problems, and I'll go into those as briefly as I can here for just a second. To preface that, now, Brendan, you came from one of the most car-dependent cities in Canada, in Vancouver, right, where everyone's commuting every day. You've got this constrained. No one comes to northwestern Canada to be stuck in traffic. They come to visit Victoria, and they come to visit downtown Vancouver, right?
Yeah.
And they come to see the nature, right? No one ever is like, you know what I really want to do? I want to be stuck on I-5 in Seattle. They go to Seattle to go see, downtown Tacoma or the Space Needle or the Puget Sound or something. But no one's ever like, it'd be really great being stuck on I-5 between Portland and Seattle. That would be wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No one thinks that's fun. It'll be wonderful waiting at the border crossing in Bellingham and just an endless line of cars waiting in to get into Vancouver.
Yeah. But even like this, like it's good because actually it's good this is your reference point, and you know that my experience in Vancouver, because that is the place that I most know the suburbs of, and was initially really truly horrified by, like, because I don't really know the suburbs of other cities so well, let's say. And that's my first experience where I realized the difference there, where it was like, you can live in the city center, and sure, it's full of, different peoples and things and whatever, but also there's a certain chic lifestyle you can still sort of eke out of it. And there's a certain hipster shit you can do and all this. And then you go to the suburbs, and it's like the worst of both worlds in some ways, like in a lot of ways. And it was a whole separate culture. Places around Vancouver, like Surrey, is notorious. This place, Surrey, it's like a suburb of Vancouver. You know it, maybe, yeah,
yeah, I do.
Okay, yeah, so you know what I mean. Then it's like
Lauren Southern's from there.
Who's from there?
Lauren Southern.
All right, yeah, and she's a really atypical kind of Surrey person, probably in a lot of ways. Yeah, although like smarter than the average one, probably. Surrey.
Yeah, but like, so in every zip code or every major metropolitan area, and Surrey's a fine example, right? There's the core downtown where only young white people go because they're broke and they can afford the outrageous rents downtown when they don't have children, and it doesn't matter that there's no parks or green spaces or anything because they don't have children yet. But then they have children, and then they have to move someplace because they don't want their children growing up in this, dangerous, violent place with no air, no parks, no anything. So they move to a suburb. And in every major metropolitan area in the United States and increasingly in Canada, right, there's a bedroom community where everyone lives and everyone drives and everyone's car dependent. And this wasn't really a thing until post 1945 America. And then the United States exported that model around the world. I've spoken to people in New Zealand, Australia, Dimes from the Blood Satellite podcast in Canada, other people in Europe about this model that has been exported all over the world and increasingly elsewhere in Europe.
This is the model of suburb, you're saying?
Yeah, the car dependent suburban
what
sprawl.
What would previously been considered, say, the area surrounding a city? I guess it really it hinges on the modern transportation and the car specifically to even consider such. Before, it would have been just like a complete walled off city.
Well, or
farms, I guess.
Well, farms or streetcar suburbs.
Right.
Right. But what that change in transportation technology does, right? It makes everyone independent. So that streetcar suburb is impracticable within, say, more than a mile or two from the streetcar line, if that makes sense. It has to be relatively compact. So it has to be traditionally, right? Let me back up here. Human settlements exist in a hierarchy of needs, right? The first kind of human settlement is a camp. It's either a hunting camp, a mining camp, a military camp. It's almost all male, right? It's there for either war or resource extraction. There's almost no women. There's no children.
Yep.
And then that might become like a village, and that village has like Dunbar's numbers worth of families or number of people, and that village is a farming village, and then you'll have a constellation of town or villages around a town, and that town will have the mill and perhaps the village might have a small church, but the town will have higher orders of economic cooperation. There might be like a village blacksmith, but if you want something really ornate done, you have to go to town, and those towns will have a constellation around a city. So you can watch like from Vladivostok all the way out to almost Chicago. Actually, there's this iterative development pattern that cities develop like gigantic ports. Dublin and Cork are where they are because of the rivers. And right,
Dublin. The name Dublin is actually it's a Viking origin word for the Black Pool, which is related to where the water came in. They could take their ships from the sea and go right up the rivers into like. I guess maybe does it refer to Dublin Bay, or I thought it referred to somewhere further in I can't remember anymore. But yeah, sorry.
So these places develop over time using this organic method that is almost kind of like a tree, but it's organic. And the United States, due to our own unique history diversity, has this problem of a population that does not play well with others, and people are desperate to get away from that, and the new prosperity after 1945 allows them to do that. And there's a couple key Supreme Court decisions that kind of act as the carrot and the stick. The Shelley v. Kramer, I believe, from 1948, makes what's called restrictive covenants illegal. And a restrictive covenant was something on the deed of the house. So if I bought, we're in downtown Seattle in 1947.
Yeah.
You buy a house from me, and the house deed says this house can only be sold to a member of the Caucasian race, or cannot be sold to, a Jew, a Muslim, a Negro, or whatever. Like that was the language on the deed itself.
Okay. And what year is this?
48. This was struck down. So you can go to in the United States, you can go to your county deeds office, and if you find a deed older than that, there will be language that restricts effectively racially restricts property sales.
Right.
And that's struck down in 1948.
Right.
So you have a bunch of boys home from the war, right? People forget it took a couple years to demobilize everybody. And so they come home, the baby boom starts, they need the new housing. Their housing hadn't been maintained much during the Depression and during the war because labor was needed elsewhere, or there just wasn't the capital to do anything. So you have this housing boom, and it's jobs for the boys, right? But above all this, right, there's the finance side of things, because the bank, mortgages have to be produced, car loans need to be produced, bonds for the roads need to be produced. So the cities need loans to build the roads, and all the boys are employed building the roads, and there's guys employed building houses, and electricians and plumbers and metal fitters and all kinds of things. So it's a massive jobs program, but at the bottom of this is a financial kind of Ponzi scheme.
Right. And
the difference between the old iterative system that was normal for Indo-Europeans all the way from the Russian Far East all the way to the Midwestern United States, that was town, village, city, right? And cities would have cathedrals and universities and all of this stuff. It enabled us to build to a complete state immediately without any consideration of whether or not this place was going to work over the long term. So Dublin has been Dublin for 1,000 years, right? Because it was a productive place to live. These suburbs, in addition to being ugly, and we can get into the aesthetics argument here in a bit, but just from a practical point of view, right? A village in rural Ireland grows barley, potatoes, and grass for cows, right?
Right.
And if the grass goes bad, right, if that stops being a productive agricultural land, the village either gets abandoned or they do something else, right? But it's the reason it's there is the land is productive, and people can make a living on that land.
Yeah.
Dublin or Cork exist because that's a port with a city, and you can take all the cheap transportation based via water, and you can have all the productive agricultural goods or whatever come into town and go out, go up the river cheap for, manufactured goods or whatever.
Yep.
And it's a productive place to have something.
Right.
These suburbs, what do they produce? They're not a village. They're not a city. They're not a town. There's no mill there. There's nothing there. They're people
like a concentration camp.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
Yeah. And that's the problem with it, is that we just built these places as storehouses for middle class people to live.
And like placing a cow in a barn or something.
Yes. And we pretend that they're worth something because they're worth something because they're worth something. It's like, well, if
everything here I can tell you, and I'm sure and a lot of other places, and everything in a even remotely suburban type place utterly hinges, the value of it currently hinges on how close it is to what they call the Lewis here, which is basically the tram line, the train into town for everybody. Everybody goes into town to work, right?
Yeah, of course.
So the value of depending on how close it is to one of these stops on this train line is absolutely vital to the price of suburban dwelling these days. Over here, I could say that anyways.
Right. Well, even there were kind of settlements like that in the United States, but then we kind of broke it with the car. And Ireland is a little bit less car dependent than the United States, but
well, they're still trying to catch up with the highway system here, and even then, it gets as typically, you know, they can never get enough because they're always importing people and everything else, so it still gets clogged and clogged and clogged. But there's still a lot of beautiful. We're losing this now. Beautiful little twisty, impractical medieval roads that are basically been paved, and you know, utterly impractical in terms of traffic. So there's a lot. They're dealing with that as well. But yeah, that's the difference between, say, here in America. It's like America really was able to do like big open vast spaces and did everything from scratch with massive like highways, you know, 5 abreast fucking freeways and shit. Like there's nothing quite like that here. They sort of do a few things like that.
Well, there's just not the space partially.
Yeah.
And partly the capital required, you know, Ireland up until relatively recently has been a poor country. I think that's probably one of the things that saved it.
Well, I wouldn't say it's been saved. It's been like it was poor but it was utterly self-reliant. It was all self-farmed and you know, totally insular and sort of like Japan in the old days. You know, it's a little bit
very autarkic.
Yeah. So and they say, the poverty, and there was the famine and you know, the struggles, but I don't think they were as bad off as people say or think. Maybe you know, in some way, if it's backwards, sure. Like, you know, say my Irish relatives still wouldn't. They sort of skipped the 60s, let's say.
Yeah,
and they still wouldn't have awareness of certain things that you would find in people of their age from other countries, which is funny. But
but are they worse off for that? I mean, like
no,
and that's
in some ways, okay. In some ways, only in the ways that they have now been tricked and cajoled into being hyper modern. So they totally missed all the fun stuff of like psychedelic drugs and prog rock. They have no awareness of any of that, or you know, they don't know.
Okay, well, like Glass Hammer, they might have missed on, but like,
but they've skipped straight ahead into gay pride and
rap,
you know,
mumble rap,
feminist.
yeah,
right. So they sort of skipped the actual fun part of early modernity and went straight into the dismal, dour stuff, right from like the total blissful, naive darkness of not being aware of any of it. And I don't know. So in a way, in that sense, you wish sometimes they did have that awareness of the cool stuff. Because like for me, because I'm a bit of a connoisseur of that 60s, 70s, 80s era stuff as well, right? For me, it's a bit lame. But anyways, I'm digressing from your point.
I follow your channels, all of them, because I also agree with
that has the dark implications right there. Everyone says that. They're always like guiltily say, even that one. And I go,
no, especially that one, actually.
Especially that one.
But like,
horse lips. Sorry. Someone says we have the horse lips. Yeah, horse lips were great. I got like several horse lips. And I'm forgetting some other bands that were really good. No, I know. It wasn't total. Sorry, I just want to respond to this. Yeah, because the Irish, he's talking about Irish psychedelic and prog. There was a lot, Thin Lizzy and all that. There was a lot of great bands. But I just know the average Irish person, an older like boomer type person that I meet, I know they don't have some of the awareness and knowledge that I would if I talking to somebody back in Canada, that they kind of missed those decades a little bit. Now you have to be honest and admit that, even though some people were aware and doing their thing. So that's sorry. Anyways,
even there were, and of course, but that think about the great contribution. So you're Canadian, and my favorite Canadian is Stan Rogers, if you're familiar with Stan.
Yeah,
of course. And so here's this man who I think Make and Break Harbor makes me cry because it's my hometown, you know.
Right.
And I feel, you know, I feel what he's feeling because I've seen it, you know, or Tiny Fish for Japan, or on one side of the family, like Field Behind the Plow, just like oh yeah, you know, you've had older relatives who just died of overwork in their 50s because they were farmers and, you know, hard scrabble dirt. But the only reason Stan Rogers' music still speaks to people 40 years after he died is because he was rooted somewhere. and that rootedness allowed him to express universals in a particular way that, Irish music and Irish people, by retaining that rootedness, Celtic music has exploded all across the world. And the Celtic diaspora from, I'm in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and we still, you can still, there's Irish festivals everywhere because the Irish people hung on to what it was to be Irish, and it's being dissolved before our eyes, and it's deliberately being done. And one of the ways it's being done is robbing them of a sense of place. If everything looks, if the car-based suburbs of outside of Dublin look exactly the same as the ones outside of Cleveland, look exactly the ones same as
they more look
out of
like
Toronto.
They more look like an English one. There's an English-Irish version of this that's slightly different, but yeah, it's more or less the same shit.
Right.
But it is a bit different. It is slightly, it wouldn't be as big. They like the sort of Coronation Street side-by-side duplexes kind of thing. Okay. I don't know. In some ways it's similar now because they really do the hyper-modern box, the modern, the box house with the big glass windows. Or they make a complex of apartments, and it looks like how do you even describe it? I don't know what the fuck it is. It's so hideous. But maybe that's more of a vernacular that is truly international. Maybe that I don't know. Yeah. Sorry.
But
more or less the same, though. Yeah, more or less.
But I don't know how often you get back to Canada, right? But there's no difference between, and it's sad because the great Jane Jacobs, right, left New York for Toronto, and
who's that?
Montreal. Jane Jacobs. She was the writer behind The Death and Life of Great American Cities. She's one of the first urbanist types to talk about the problems with suburbs and all of this stuff.
Okay.
But, Montreal is probably the last great North American city. Toronto was for many years the best North American city, but it's being destroyed now. And it's being destroyed in the same way that American cities were destroyed.
I would say also, was it San Francisco? Was that
the great? I think it's Tennessee Williams said. Pardon me. There's only 4 cities or 3 cities in North America: New Orleans, San Francisco, and New York. Everywhere else is just Cleveland.
Well, I remember there was a time, I think, say before the war, around the height of Art Deco, and I remember actually, of all people, Norman Mailer.
There's an extensive quote from him in your book. It's wonderful.
Yeah, but no, he had another quote where he said, "I remember when I was a kid, you'd go to these different cities in America, and they were all totally different architecturally, and there was a unique kind of Art Deco style to each of them." And I don't remember the example of cities he gave, but he listed like 4, 5, or 6, and I believe him because you see these old photos, like a photo 1920s.
You could tell that you were in New York or in San Francisco or in Boston.
Or Chicago, whatever. They did have a unique kind of. They were a bit unique at one point early on. It didn't last long.
Yeah, they were. Yeah. Well, and they were more dependent on local materials, and there was less baleful influence of modern architecture. But I'll give you a perfect example of if you're enough of an age, do you remember the Batman animated series cartoon from the early 90s with Bruce Timm?
Yeah.
And that Art Deco aesthetic that was put forth in that cartoon, that was actually really great. That Art Deco America could have been something that was actually like worthwhile and beautiful and worthy.
Oh, it was for a decade, maybe, or how long?
Yeah,
I don't know how long.
Yeah, and you could have had. There's a reason. Anytime there's a movie in New York, they show you the Flatiron Building and the Empire State Building, right? Like no one's like, oh, let's just watch this more of these, gigantic glass towers. Yeah. I mean, what architecturally, if the World Trade Center had been 50 stories shorter, who cares? There's a dozen buildings just like that are, they're not as tall. So what? Like there's just gigantic glass tower that's not distinguished by anything.
And I'm not remotely surprised that they collapsed. Just like these things are usually fairly shite in their actual, I don't know how conspiratorial you are about that, but I don't believe they were.
I have a collection of tinfoil baseball caps. You want to get crazy? Let's get crazy.
But... Okay, well, I don't want to get into that. I believe they did it naturally just because I think those things are not well structurally built compared to like an old, Art Deco hotel in New York or something. Like even the old skyscrapers they used to make, like they were stone and everything, and they looked pretty solid.
well, they at least looked like they were supposed to be there.
Yeah, like
Right.
it wouldn't be easy. I bet you the Empire State wouldn't collapse that easily if you something blew off the top of it like that. It would. I bet you the whole thing wouldn't just like tremble and collapse, because it's not just like, you know, steel bars and glass.
It looks like something that's supposed to last.
Yeah,
and a huge part of why, you know, a stone cottage that's been in the Irish countryside for 1,000 years, right? The stone barn that's been there.
This shack, I built this shack myself out of stone. I don't know, you can't really see it, and I bet you it'll be here long after the house is gone.
Right.
I bet it will.
Right. Well, so what you have these, you have buildings, like the new, churches in England and Ireland that are 1,000 years old. In all over Europe, there's
older. Yeah.
Yeah. And a sense of that this matters, and that, like, you look at the Empire State Building or pardon me, St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, like it looks like that place matters and this is supposed to be here. They built it that way. And these gigantic glass towers, other than, like passively cooking the sidewalk, what do they add? What do they add to the surround? Do they look like, oh, this is a monument that's going to be here for years and years and years? Like, no, there's nothing to that. And
the idea that it should be a monument is gone from people's minds.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And you brought this up in your book, but like a house, like the Garrett Apartments of Paris, like when you're a fifth floor walk up, where you've got the only place you can really fully stand up is in the middle with this Garrett apartment. If you're young, you've been young and newly married at one time when broke and you had hardly anything, right? But if you're like you and Mrs. Hurd, right, you just starting out and you got nothing, and you got this fifth floor walk up, and all you've got is each other, and 20 years later, that's like romantic. And every time you pass that building, you'll be like, oh, that's where we first, that's where our first place was. And you'll tell your kids, like, oh, your mother and I, this is the apartment, like when we were fifth floor walk up, we had nothing. But you could actually afford to, like, cities could actually be places where young people were actually, afforded to live. Now, I mean, how can I've seen 4 or 5 years ago, there's a Catholic writer by the name of Hilary White. She's from Vancouver. She lives in Europe now. She posted of a garage in the greater Vancouver area. Just a garage. $300,000.
Yeah.
Right. How can anyone live in Vancouver?
And why?
No one. And why would you? Yeah. How can young people? How can there be a community? How can there be it can't be a place anymore. And that's the thing about these suburbs, is that they're no place, right? They're nowhere and everywhere at the same time. What's the difference between a suburb outside of Orlando and a suburb outside of middle of North Dakota? Well, the weather, but in terms of like architecture or distinctive buildings and skyline, it's all the same, right? You've got your big box stores, your Walmart, Office Depot, Sportsman's Warehouse, and Texas Roadhouse Authentic Barbecue, right? All in this gigantic parking lot that is twice the size or three times the size of the building. I looked something up recently, even my local Walmart. The Walmart itself was like, I want to say 6 acres. The parking lot was 15. So here's this like 15-acre thing with this little carbuncle of a Walmart in the middle of it, and it's just just bakes in the summer, right? And it's just a vast, like, in the wintertime, it's this like hellish planescape, with like looks like a frozen wasteland, and,
hellish is the word. Yeah.
And so how do people value their places when their places are hostile to them? And how do they like derive, like, oh, I'm from Surrey, Oh, no one can be like, oh, like
I am from Surrey.
Like, how is that something to be proud of? You know, and I'm not to pick on.
Who would
Surrey
actually say that? I bet you Lauren Southern says I'm from Vancouver. She doesn't say I am from Surrey, unless she is forced down to it.
Right.
I am from Surrey.
Right. How does this? And no one says, oh, I grew up in the Jersey Bird. Like they'll talk about like the Philadelphia suburbs, or they'll talk about the suburbs of Los Angeles, or they'll talk about like oh, friends from Los Angeles, and they'll say, oh, I'm from LA. It's like, oh, which part? And then they'll tell you, oh, I'm from Bakersfield, or outside of Bakersfield, or I'm from Santa Barbara, or I'm from up north. And right.
Well, there's many. Let me just touch on a few of the things you said there. So in terms of the building, including in the suburbs or the downtown buildings that we build, and you say, the people themselves are at least partially to blame for swallowing this and taking it. Like the average normal type people I know still queue up to buy these shite apartments and things. They seem to end up miserable about it later on, but it doesn't seem like there's anything I can say to them as like they don't know anything about a book I've written or anything else. But me just speaking to them as a fellow normal person and saying, I think that's shite. I don't think you should buy that and live there. It doesn't seem to affect them so much. And they tend to fall for it. I don't know. I guess the average person just sort of does what they think everybody else is doing and doesn't think about it too much. That's part of the problem with them. But say, it's not just the reasons for, say, the glass boxes downtown and the relentless box cutter duplex of the suburbs. A big part of the reason they get away with it, autists and spurgs on Twitter will tell you it's cost. It's not cost. It is the aesthetics of modernism from the mid 20th century that lend itself to just not worrying about it. In the past, if you erected a building, you considered its aesthetics and you considered it as you wanted it to last, and you wanted to represent something of the people in the area and to be something. It was a monument. And whenever you put up a building, they had an awareness that you really must consider it as something that's going to be there forever, or not forever, but for a long time. And it should follow, certain aesthetic codes and, be fit in and stuff. There was laws about this. Now
it should match in a certain way the materials around it. So
with the aesthetics of modernism, they just completely ditch because art and aesthetics themselves have become about personal expression firstly. And also then art, just begun with painting and sculpture. You see these nonsensical, abstract things sort of making a mockery of everything. And there was a pure relativism, just a void of nothing is tangible or nothing you can grasp. And so all the tradition and all the principles of beauty were abandoned. And so that paved the way for them to erect these monstrosities at whatever cost suits them. Although often actually they're incredibly expensive, which is the other fucking horrific thing about it. But it's impossible for them to even consider it aesthetically in a proud way, because all our values are set against any kind of confidence in our culture and our history, because that smacks of colonialism or whatever, right? It's all associated with that kind of guilt trip shit. And that, it's been around so long now that the average person can't even consider, they just think, oh, that's old fashioned. I want to be new. And they want to get the box building anyways and think it's great. I meet a lot of hipsters who think this stuff is great still.
Well, and, these hipsters, their sense of aesthetics has been so destroyed. And it's not even like, the golden ratio. Like, think about this.
Well, the golden ratio is always important. Don't ever slough off the golden ratio. Jesus.
No.
Not in front of me.
Well, let's just use that example of that rural Ireland, right? If we took a perfect golden ratio villa from Capri and put it on the coast off Cork, that would look weird.
Well,
it would be discordant.
Maybe, but things like this have kind of been done. There are imitation Italian villas here as well, but I know what you mean. Yes, but yeah.
Okay, so it's disharmonious with the environment. And a building that was built with local stone, with local woods, local materials, if you were to, you could take a perfect Philadelphia row house and stick it somewhere else, say San Francisco or Dublin somewhere, and it would be discordant. It would clash.
This is true, but I just a particular example, because there are like there's a beautiful island in Cork that was done up. What's it called again? Garnish Island. And some crazy eccentric lady made it like an Italian gardens, complete with a temple to Apollo. And it's absolutely the most amazing thing you'd ever see. This little island, you can only get there by boat, and there's seals everywhere, and it's completely amazing. So I think in terms of if it's a European vernacular, it can work in these places. But like you must say, with the modernists and their glass boxes, they're intentionally building. They want to say no decoration. And it's not just the excuse by practical people would be that it's cost, but no, aesthetically they want no decoration. They want it plain. They want large. They continually want large glass windows. They have an obsession with, I think, light going through it or something, even though they do it very impractically and stupidly. And not just no decoration. What else was I going to say? That's one of their main obsession. Also, that they actually want it to be a little bit ugly. They think ugliness is a goofy kind of. They think it's kinky, and they're being artistic,
transgressive. Right? Like no. And of course, and here's my point with the clashing, right? That over time, whatever, you could grow used to, like if a different place was with a different vernacular that still adhere to the rules, you can still kind of make that work. And what these people are doing, what these modernists are doing with the Corbusiers and IMPs and all of these other vile, disgusting people who all their buildings should be dynamited and come the revolution.
Hopefully they will be. Yeah. Hopefully they will.
All their buildings will be torn down. All their books will be burned.
Everything being built since I don't know what
1970 probably.
Probably.
Yeah, like Sagrada Familia might be the only thing left.
But they even destroyed the other side of that, kind of. I mean, it's not. Have you seen the other side of it?
Oh,
it's still being built, right? Yeah, because he died. Gaudi died without leaving plans for the other side. So you go there, and they hired some 80s artists to design the other side. It's completely not in keeping. It's not like modern shapes, obtuse shapes, but it's this kind of gay representation of the crucifixion. But the Romans look like centurions they look like Xylons from Battlestar Galactica or something.
No,
it's odd. It's fucking weird, and it's just like, okay, what the fuck? Like, could you not just just imitate the other side again or something? I don't know.
Yeah, just mirror it. Symmetry's good.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've got this, right? All of this architecture that speaks a vernacular of that's hostile to actually Tucker Carlson when he was on with Russell Brand about 6 months ago talked about this. Like the architectural message that they are sending is that we hate you and we want you to be miserable. And the suburbs say, you do not deserve to have anything in your life that's worth looking at. Your life needs to be bland and boring and dull and conformist.
I think it forces that conformism too, because each house is a row by row cookie cutter. Everything's the same. Little patch of grass, you must cut your grass. Yes. I mean, people do within that try to do their. They always end up being individualistic and doing something or other, right? But it's much more. I think it forces more of a conformism than than a normal village would, anyways.
Yeah, of course it does. So in America, at least, here's have you heard of the consultant's triangle? Does that
no? What's that? I'm not up in all this urbanism stuff. That's why it's interesting to talk to you about it, because I don't.
Okay, so
I haven't studied it.
This is a project can either be done cheaply, done well, or done fast, but you can only pick two. You can do it fast and cheap, but you can't do it right. You can do it right and you can do it fast, but you can't do it cheap. You can do it, so you're swapping your time for, like, so these are your resource constraints essentially. Right. Well, in America, spatially, we've made this compromise. You can be close to work, it can be affordable, or it can be safe. You can be close to work and safe. It's going to cost you millions of dollars in any major city in America.
Yeah.
So you can live in Central Park West and be safe.
You've been living in that garage in Vancouver, the fucking, or whatever. Something like that.
Right. You can live in downtown Vancouver with your $1 million flat. Right. And so, or you can, and most people have made the choice of necessity, right? Like you've got a family, you can't let your wife and children live someplace that's not safe. So you go like, okay, well, they got to be safe. So that's one. And I don't have $1 billion. So we got to go where we can afford it. So they went out to the suburbs. Well, I'm familiar with the guys who were organizing the National Justice Party here in the States. And when I talk to them, organizing a meeting where you want 500 people there, you have to find someplace with 500 parking spots. So you're depoliticized that way. Because how do you get together with all these guys? So you've got the parking lot, right? It becomes the focus of the, right? The church, instead of opening the doors to the church and coming out upon the village square where you see, the courthouse and on one side and like a restaurant on the other and, the bandstand or whatever across from the church or another church or whatever, right? You're upon this gigantic parking lot. So you leave church, this thing that's supposed to be the highlighted your week, spiritually speaking, and you open the doors and what do you see but like acres and acres of asphalt.
Right.
It's not an experience aesthetically speaking. So
well, a lot of this is like is incidental to or an artifact of the invention of the car and how it transformed things as well.
Sure.
So
but
technological thing.
But so if you don't worry about safety, right? And you live close to your job and right, how you can't organize with your neighbors because you'll get stabbed. If you try and organize the suburbanites, they're all desperate. They're all desperate about slipping down another run down the ladder. They've got to hang on to what they've got. If you're wealthy, if you're that person who has the, flat on Central Park West or, North London or whatever, you rock the boat too much, you're going to lose everything, right? You can be, a successful barrister in North London, and the second you even like, oh, hey, I read this book by Brendan Hurd, it was pretty good, you could lose everything, right? Like, right? Like you follow the wrong Telegram channel and it becomes known.
Well, I'm not quite so scandalous, but maybe.
Right.
I'm not so, maybe because I'm not so well known, but anyways, yeah.
But well, I mean, if it became known that sympathetic to even something as banal as UKIP, right? Like you can be in trouble over that, let alone anyone actually talking sense. So, right. There's this spatial arrangement of things that's been kind of calculated to maximally psychologically abuse people and at the same time rob them of ability to do anything about it materially.
Right.
So there's a spiritual and a physical impoverishment that go with this arrangement of space. And, the first shopping mall was built by Victor Gruen, who was an Austrian immigrant of if you're thinking every single time, you're right. And the suburb was first built by Levitt and Sons, who were Seabees in World War II. And they're Saturday people as well. And of course,
what year was the first shopping mall built? I'm curious.
I want to say 49. I'd have to double check.
So it was really right after that. Okay, shopping mall, right?
And which is like kind of a faux agora, right? But it's been privatized. So if you like on the old village square, right, you could stand there and scream and wave your pamphlets, but it was the village square, so there was no one who could be like, well, you can't belong on the village square. It's like, no, I'm a villager here in this village and I have every right to say that the moon is made of green cheese and you can't stop me, right? But the shopping mall has been subsidized or privatized, and of course the man chiefly responsible for the the parkways development in America is a man by the name of Robert Moses, and he was the parks commissioner of the state of New York for decades, from like the 30s to the 70s. And he was there's a gigantic fat book called The Power Broker by Robert Caro that just goes through, and this man was more than anyone responsible for the auto-based development pattern that took place in the United States.
Really? Robert Moses holding the tablets from God himself.
Oh yeah. He was yep. And So we have this kind of mode of living that is imposed on people from the outside, and there's the carrot of go live in the suburbs, this leafy green, your own little mini English manor, right?
Mm.
That's too big to mow, or too big to mow and too small to farm, right? Like, so your weekends as a, like, are taken up
You
by,
can't do it. Yeah,
right?
exactly. Let me just say that hints on, maybe you were heading there. Sorry, but I just want to intercede, because there was before, you were either a city person, or you were sort of a country gent, or maybe a sort of peasant, or what do they call them, serf or whatever, right? But even those guys would have a little plot and a place to keep their pig, and where they could grow their carrots and potatoes. Like, you really don't get that. The suburban people just have grass. Maybe they have a little garden or something, but it's not like you can just like, oh, I'm going to have my chickens over here and my beehives over here. I mean, maybe
Yep.
very rarely someone gets away with that, but it's too antisocial and weird for the typical suburbs. So you're not living like a country. You compare it there to being like a country, a country having a manor or something, but it's not. You can't have that. And you're not. It's like you're not in the city. You're not properly in the city, and you're not properly in the country. You're just kind of warehoused it's like an open air green warehouse.
Yes. Yes.
Thing.
So, like, to use that example, right? So not to get you in too much trouble, but like, those
careful.
Anglo-Irish overlords, that the landlords, right, that oppressed the Irish for hundreds of years.
Yep.
They might have like a big estate in County Wexford with, a grand like Georgian manor or something.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't, and beautiful house, whatever. Yeah, like grand drive, 57 rooms. What they don't tell you is there's like this whole sprawling estate behind it, where there are guys whose job is like to go into the forests and chop wood to heat the houses, right?
Yeah.
And there's this whole ecosystem of support. And that what they don't tell you is, like, in the wintertime, they really only use like 10 rooms in the house, right? Because they don't want to heat all 57 rooms in the house. And so they'll shut the door, and they'll put up, battening around the doors, and, close all the windows, and basically just let that room freeze. The spare bedrooms that no one cares about, they'll let that room freeze. Yeah. Well, in America, in the suburbs, right, we build these English manor houses in miniature with the high vaulted ceilings, and like, you're just pouring money out the door, because that high vaulted ceiling in the the manor house in County Wexford, like, that was only heated when there were like guests over, man. No one cared. No one cared.
And also, you touched on the fact that they were an ecosystem. Like, the local farm, everyone was employed, and they would have acres and acres of land that was being farmed, that was keeping the village alive. The local village and everybody else would be centered around this. Right. Like, the manor houses in America, they're just there. They just are on their own. Maybe he's got some horses he rides or something, but I highly doubt he's keeping the local area. He's not even associated with the local community in terms of like.
Right. Well, he's got his 3 whole acres or whatever, but like, so all that means is he spends all his Saturday mowing his lawn.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Right. He's got to get a riding mower for thousands
waste,
and thousands. Right. And instead of grazing sheep on that, or grazing cattle on that, or grazing horses on that, he's mowing his lawn, and that's his Saturday, right? Like, his Saturday is going to Home Depot for home projects. And in that manor in County of Wexford, there'd be a gardener and repair guys and horse guys, and there'd be a whole.
Even now you can go to these castles and these manors, even if they're now sort of more public, or whoever owns them opens them up, but they're basically maintain a sort of self-sustaining kind of manor farm thing about them. They usually have their own gardens, they're growing this and that, or they have animals, and they just kind of, you go there on the weekend to the market stalls and you buy their stuff or whatever. There's a lot of that still. Yeah.
Right. Well, so the American suburban experiment forces people to live on these places where it's not like it's a small garret apartment where, like, you and the missus you have your love to keep you warm, and that's really all you need. Like, you don't need a whole lot. It's this small little place that you've got common walls with other people, and those common walls kind of radiate a little bit of heat, and you've got a little bit of heat, and the best kind of pressy of this whole thing, again, another doorstopper of a book, is E. Michael Jones's Slaughter of Cities, goes over this quite extensively. But you have, right, these villages that people lived relatively close by and then farmed, the surrounding countryside. In America, we had this ridiculous idea of the homestead where you're by yourself. And it's Jeffersonian Enlightenment nonsense. That I can get into that more some other date. But what it does is it has this weird psychological effect where you think that like it's just you and your family on your own, and no family's ever lived that way, really, in history. Like there's always been the need for division of labor. There's always been need for defense. Like no family ever like defended themselves by themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Viking raids were not repulsed by like a sturdy homesteader with like his rifle and his axe or whatever. Like no, that they had to be collectively opposed.
Yeah.
And right.
Yeah, for sure. There's another element to the horror of the suburbs, though, which is a kind of cultural element, which I noticed again since we brought up places like Surrey. Like I remember my time in Vancouver and going these places, and I noticed this is because I would be living more or less downtown or like different places, like West Vancouver or whatever, North Vancouver, but like near the center when I was working there. And so when I would travel out, but my family would live in a small town in the Rockies, like far to the east, and was just like total small town life, not a farm or anything, but it was a stark. That was nice, and being in the city center was kind of okay in some ways. It was a bit shy, but when you go, that's when I noticed when you went to a place like Surrey, for example, that it was just a hopeless middle ground void of nothingness in between, where none of the good parts of either almost. You can live sort of comfortably in a way, and you had all your neighbors, and you might know them, sort of. But culturally speaking, and this goes back to say even Lauren Southern too. I don't know how much she would be a part of this. Maybe she's a part because she's fairly cultural and smart, and in some ways, she's not the totally average person or anything. But I remember in particular, a friend of mine had pals he was playing with. They had a death metal band, and I believe pretty sure it was in Surrey. So we would go out there, and I would see these places, and I would drive by he'd just drive for. It feels like a long time of just the same house over and over and over and over and over. And then, and there'd be big enough houses, nice little stretch of lawn, maybe, or whatever. And you go to this guy's house, he's playing his death metal. And I would talk to these guys, and I would go out and we go to their local parties and meet the people and do, hang out and stuff like that. And it would be like, and these are cool metal guys. I can only imagine the totally average. Like you go to the local shopping mall, for instance, and you see some really hardcore wiggers and much more that kind of low culture, just total bottom line kind of conformist 100 IQ type people in a place like Surrey than you would either in the downtown or even in the very small town. And that's really where you get a congregation of the lowest cultural types in a way, where people were raised in that suburban environment, which was like a completely void. There was an artlessness and a culturalistness. And everything is there.
Why do you think Kurt Cobain, like garage band, stuff? Why were all the grunge, depressing guys from like from the West Coast of the United States, the West Coast suburbs, where they'd like the one thing they could do was get together in their dad's garage and play angsty music, right? Because it was right. Yeah. So. I've lived a couple places where we had a local, right? And you go down to the local after work, and you have a couple pints, and maybe somebody's got a jukebox, and maybe somebody's playing, but you just having a local is a great thing. Well, if there's no such like, and maybe you're 15 and you sneak in a little bit early, and you have the bartender knows you and slips you an illegal pint of Guinness or whatever. But he knows you're walking home. He knows you, right? There's no culture. There's no third places in these suburbs. And what a third place is like, it's not work, it's not home, it's somewhere else. Where do you meet girls?
I don't know. The shopping mall, I guess. There's only really like the buildings and then the shopping mall. Really, is there anything else? There might be like a... Right. There might be a larger shopping mall with a... Go on.
You know, like how do you, like a third place? There are no third places. There's no public squares. There's no bars. There's no, like, you have to drive everywhere. So you can't like have a couple beers and maybe you get a little drunk and embarrass yourself, but maybe, you know, she thought you were cute and gives you, like, has her friend give you your number or whatever. Like the way that people meet, the way that people make friends, the way that people organize politically, all depend on these third places. You know, and you read the memoirs, say, of Patrick Pierce, and the revolution couldn't have happened without the ability to organize in
Porrick Pierce. Porrick Pierce Park is like very close here. I was just there today, actually. Where's his house where he had his boys' school or whatever. And he lived.
Right. So, but like, you can't have a life, you can't have a society if there's no place. If your church requires, you know, 5 acres of parking lot, where are the boys going to go after church to, you know, like the men of the parish going to have like a couple beers and talk about what's the pressing business that needs to happen? Maybe how are the, you know, if there's a community member that needs a hand, how they're going to sit down and like go sit in that awful parking lot in July when it's 115 degrees out, you know, and the asphalt burns your feet. You're going to just sit there in the sun and talk? No, of course you're not. It's impossible, right?
I just found it led to a type of person that was a bit more savage in a lot of ways. Even the smart ones, they would be kind of because they had that cultural dearth in the way they grew up. The Surrey people is my example again. It's like it made them really quite depraved and degenerate in some ways. Sort of, and like, and more so anyways, and sort of like hyper modern. You know, you can see, I can imagine everybody raised there either becoming like a, you know, a cam girl or a drug dealer.
Well, yeah, and not even like savage in them. I'm a big fan of Robert E. Howard's Conan stories, right?
Yeah, not savage, like a modern savage, like a mall rat, fucking criminal, sideways hat, fucking loser.
Right. Well, and savage in a particular sort of selfish, individualistic, hedonistic, pointless sort of way. Like, so, you know, Conan, right? His rages are great. I really love your pulp stuff because, right, like the whole point of pulp is like in this gray conformist, like his depressions are super black, you know, and his rages are great and his lusts are great and his appetite for food is great. So he'll, you know, Conan will have like an entire leg of meat and like sleep with 3 wenches and then go, you know, like there's a life there, there's some vitality, right?
Yeah. Well, you know what, I must say, I've said this before, but I must interject it once more. One of my favorite Conan stories, the opening of it just says everything about the book and like how unmodern it is. He's the hero of the story. It begins with he's in bed with some guy's wife, some pirate. The guy comes home, Conan, and like starts a fight, and Conan jumps out of bed, kills him, and then just jumps out the window and leaves. And he's the hero of the story. Like, imagine that in a modern context. Like,
of course.
It's so fucking excellent.
But like, so how can, right? So you're, I forget how many, but an astonishing percentage of car trips that are taken in the modern world are taken by yourself, right? So
what do you mean?
So like, just the driver.
Oh, alone. Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. So think about this, right? You get in your garage, you get out to your car, you get in your car by yourself, you open the garage, you get out of the garage, you close the garage, you drive 50, 100 miles by yourself. That's why podcasts exist, right? Because so many people were like stuck in traffic in 2002. And they were like, if I hear, you know, Don't Stop Believing one more time, I'm going to commit a homicide. So they started listening to podcasts. Like, I've got this iPod, right? And if you heard, the Fox 100.7, where we still pretend it's 1978 and you still have hair, right? Like they heard that and they were like, I've heard this, 100 times, and so the podcast is invented by
who does Don't Stop Believing? That form?
Pardon?
Who does Don't Stop Believing? Is it Foreigner? Is that the band?
I can't remember. But like,
okay, go on.
Yeah, but like you've heard it 1,000 times, right? The rock format radio. or magic 97.4 or 97.5 postmenopausal woman radio for women who just want to feel good about themselves, right? Like
They never do. They never do.
No, they never do.
You can only distract them from thinking about themselves. That's all you can do.
Right. But or National Public Radio 93.1, where we're going to use your tax money to tell you that you're evil for being white and upper middle class, and you're going to love it.
That academic errors, yes.
Yeah, of course.
Whispery voice, but in like a nice sounding microphone. Yeah.
Yep.
But has that little timbre of academic to it.
Yeah, right. Culture, because Saturday people telling you what you need to know. So we've got this cultural wasteland where you're isolated by yourself, right, in your car. Then you go to your job, and you're at your job, and none of your coworkers live next to each other. So back in the old days, you were mentioning the trolley line, right?
Hmm.
Well, outside of factory town, right? Like you'd get on your trolley with a bunch of guys from your neighborhood, and you'd all jump on the trolley with your lunch boxes. You jump on the trolley to work. You get off. You go to work with those guys. You get on your trolley ride back home. You get off the trolley with those same guys, and maybe two or three of you like, hey man, we got this political problem we need to deal with, and you'd stop at the local, right, that catered to guys that worked at that factory getting off of work, right? That local pub stayed in business by a couple beers for each of the guys, so you'd have and then you'd go home to your family, where your family knew you're probably related to a bunch of the guys you work with via marriage, right? You married the guy two doors over, you married his sister, or he's married to your sister or something like that. Well, you go to work now and you don't live next to anybody. You work with them 8 hours a day, and then you go home individually. Or you go to school with them individually. They're not next door. They're not somewhere. You're not family. You're not friends. You're not kith and kin, as the old saying goes, right? Yeah. So you're just incredibly isolated, culturally and physically, from each other. You don't know these people. You don't know their names. You don't. It's not like I went to school with my cousin or whatever. Anything. There's no commonality with anybody. And that leads to some really severe cultural distortions. Really severe.
And it all started so instantly. Like, say in the 50s, it was all represented on, say, television, like Leave It to Beaver and that. I imagine they were living in some kind of suburb while the dad would go off in his giant Landshark car to work in his suit, and then come back on the weekend and play golf or whatever. That was the ideal of the suburbs as it was sold. And it was probably maybe not so bad in that sense, in a certain sense.
But in those days, like Dad, his gigantic Landshark car, when gas was like 10 cents a gallon, and he was only 20 minutes from work. Right now, right? How far are people driving? Outside there, you got people like driving from the Cotswolds into London every day.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy.
There's I know guys. I know people that do like 2-hour commutes easy. Here, I mean, I'm maybe in Canada. I'm sure it's worse in Canada actually, but like for here 2 hours considered quite long. I mean, it only takes 3 hours to drive from one tip of Ireland to the other. Here, I just want to read a super chat we got here. ML Wiz, thank you very much. He says, right-wing urban planning to create the third places, that facilitating revolutionary organization, and Conan savagery mentioned great stream. I guess it's not a question. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, ML Wiz. Yes. Right-wing urban planning to create the third places. Oh, so yeah, right. If we had right-wing urban planning, we would do it there. So how would you suggest we do it then? Would you... Well, I would personally try to. Okay, you tell me what you've studied this. You're an urbanist. I don't know this shit. So go on.
Okay, well, I will just interject real briefly, and then I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay.
Support the first thing you do is support the people that support you. Buy Brendan's books. Yes, but I'm completely 100% serious about this. Buy. If you particularly like a streamer, I'm fortunate enough that my friend Pete Quinones has me on his show once a month. Like, support the people. Like, if you particularly find someone's message compelling, I'm a panelist on the Third Rail on the Right Stuff.biz. along with our mutual friend Bleeding Holograms. Like, find the people that you support, right, and support them. We got wrecked because bad people took over the boards of all the orchestras and the operas and the art institutes and the museums and everything else. And maybe you can say, well, they had money and we don't. Well, the first step to us having money is us paying our artists and paying our publishers and paying our journalists and paying the people doing the work for us so that we can build something. So, before we do anything else, like, stop being, the only thing cheaper than a Semite is an anti-Semite. So, like, stop being so damn cheap and pay the people that are producing good work. And I have to co-sign Brandon's work 100%. I've read all of it. Aegon number 9 was particularly pretty fun. I liked it a lot. But, like, I've read all the Aegon issues. I've just reread his wonderful chapter on architecture for this discussion from The Decline and Fall of Western Art. Read these books and support the people that support you. If we want to get out anywhere, we've got to do it.
Well, thanks very much. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. And I've been actually thinking about it lately. Like, yes, the books are, I think, very good. Because I look at some other people's work. I look at some people, I won't say any names because I don't want to get any flame wars. But there's a certain corner of right-wing publishing that is, like, famous and sort of entered the scene suspiciously and sucked up a lot of the energy and sales. Although maybe there's associated sales with them as well. But kind of like you do something and then you see these other people do some imitation of it, and generally their writing is not very good. You can tell they're not fans of either the subject or the genre or whatever. And so I worked hard at those books, and I am proud of them, very proud of them. Someone told me today, The Dream God, they thought, they were like, this in a sane world you would have had a Hugo Prize and a movie deal and all this kind of thing. And, like, I would have thought that too. And I was very proud of the art book as well. But, like, a lot of the energy gets sucked away by others that probably system approved people or something. I don't know. But yes, you're right. And we should all be supporting each other. And, I had a sort of, because especially there's many times I thought, well, maybe it's like they sell okay. It's worth doing. I can make some money out of them, and it's definitely worth doing. And I continue doing them. But it should probably be doing better than it is in some ways. And I'm not great with advertising and marketing. I just kind of do my thing, and I don't know. But yeah, I think it's good compared to, like I said, some of these people there to divert your attention, trying to do something similar. Watch out for those people. That's all I'll say about that, about my publishing and whatever. And actually, there's some exciting things going on. Like, there's an Aegon video game coming out soon. That's going to be very high quality. Good friend of mine's been working on it. I'm doing the music for it as we speak. It's quite fun. Excellent. And I'm very late on delivering him some music. Actually, I had to stop what I was doing today to do this stream, and I was sort of frustrated with the way the certain song was going and whatever. That's good, fun stuff going on. Excellent things. There's also, what else is going on? Oh, there's a bunch of shit. There's always something. But yeah, Thanks for helping me with talking about the books and that. Yeah. I'm not very good at advertising and that stuff. I just kind of do what I feel like doing. I mean, because it's so cheesy and shite to have to say, hey, and buy this and buy that. But you do have to do it, I guess. Whatever. But we're diverting from the topic. I had a point I wanted to make about based on something you said there. Shit, I've lost it now.
You had a vision for right wing.
No, this guy mentioned it. I thought, do you have a vision? Oh, that was your vision. You said it, did you? Did you say?
Well, I've said a couple things. I've said a couple things over. If anyone who's followed my content for years, I've said this over and over and over again on some programs that are no longer existing, unfortunately. But if you got the first thing to solving this enemy and acedia that destroys our people and is to have some bros. Have a group of 5 guys that that you trust. That
that's what you were saying. Yeah, but do you not have a plan for how to arrange a suburb?
Yeah, I do, and I'm getting into
an overflow of population or something.
Yeah, and I'll get into that here. And so the guys down in Australia, Thomas Sewell and others are working on some stuff like this. So the first step to understanding all of this, and you can go into Christopher Alexander or the Strong Towns books or whatever. You can read all you want. These places are not productive. They don't pay for themselves. They're a time sink, a money sink. So the first step is finding a way to build a place that pays you back somehow. And that could see something as small as like you've got to exercise, right? You've got to have a gym, right? So maybe you and 5 buddies get together and you purchase a bunch of stuff, a bunch of exercise equipment. You know, it costs you a few £1,000, a few $1,000. But in, you know, there's 5 of you, it costs you £2,000. So that's, you know what, 400 quid per person, right? 400 or $400. And your gym membership is $100 a month. So in 5 months, you've paid yourself back. And now you've got 5 guys that are working out together that, you're now putting that, instead of putting the $100 into the gym every month, you have a gym that is, you're saving $100, and maybe you keep paying that $100 a month, and you, instead of using a buddy's garage, you eventually get your own like standalone structure, and that standalone structure can be, you know, like just one of those big sheds from Home Depot that's got a couple stories, and maybe the bottom floor is gym and the top floor is like a homeschool co-op.
Right. So you think we need to go back to having a camp again and building up from there? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying, right, each individual circumstance is going to vary according to, you know, like if you have one of your buddies has $1 million, like you can do like a lot more. But if you've got 5 guys with middle class salaries, right, you know, you're being squeezed from both ends on purpose, and so you don't have a whole lot of room to move. That's on purpose, and you know, if you're listening to this stream, you understand why that is. And I don't need to elaborate, or I shouldn't. So by creating room to maneuver for yourself, right? If you're, you know, you have 4 families at homeschool and 1 single dude, right? The homeschool families can all get together and homeschool in, you know, the gym is downstairs and the other thing is upstairs. Well, maybe, you know, one of the gals has a sister who's interested in a single dude, right? We have to rebuild that which was destroyed from the ground up. Like, you know, you and I are both old, Brendan, but like for younger guys in our, in the right wing, like just meeting people is a huge problem. You know,
is it? Yeah, you think so? Yeah, I hear about a lot of them meeting up these days.
Well, I mean, usually just like creating families and living normal lives is increasingly, it's made difficult by circumstances. So if instead of having a local pub that works, you've got like a small bar in this place, you know, like you know,
that'd be cool. Yeah.
You know,
here it'd be almost impossible. Here, like the idea of renting like a warehouse to do that. In America, probably you can get away with that. Here, it would be so expensive. Like, so expensive. It'd be insane. Well, like, I do want to, just for my son, actually, who's getting teenage. I probably will get a bench press and set some stuff up here, and stuff like that. But, yeah, you figure it has to be a totally ground up thing, like in terms of, and you know that's fine. But like, so I don't know. How do you avoid the problems of both the car, requiring travel by car, the expense as the closer you get to a center or a hub, the rents and mortgages, et cetera, being increasing in price, obviously for the reason that people want to be near to the place to work.
Yeah.
In a car-centric world, like, I don't know, you'd have to enforce strict. I do like the idea of the city-state, the polis, and in some ways it's one of the ideal setups in like many ways. But how would you enforce? You would have to say everything outside this wall is outside of us, and you're not allowed to drive, commute beyond this limit, kind of thing. Well, and then you'd have a limit to the number of people that could live there, I guess, maybe too. I don't know.
Well, Dunbar's number is a thing for a reason, like human nature being what it is. You can't really, but like one small, I mean, it's been a disaster in every other way, but like one small benefit of the COVID tyranny is now remote work is normal. I mean, you make your living online mostly, right? I mean, you're not going.
I've done it now for 20 years.
Yeah. So you need to, like, you don't need to have the car and commute and do all that stuff. And so you can make that suburban house that was this time sunk, unproductive place. You can make it a productive place by just not participating in the game of driving everywhere all the time. If you get up, your income is generated by a computer in your basement. You work, it brings money in. You're not sending money out via the car all the time, right?
Yep.
You can do things to structure your life such that you're living in a way that's more healthy. If you got 5 guys that are all working remote in roughly the same area.
So you think if more companies then would be open to remote working as a rule, which since most of these people are just commuting to go sit at a fucking computer desk, I mean, what percentage of them are doing that? 80?
Oh,
maybe
at least.
Huh?
Yeah, at least, yeah.
So, like, really, if the bosses would not be these, it's probably just like boomer bosses believing they have to like be looking over their shoulders like vultures otherwise.
Well, sure.
Because I actually, in my experience, it's been more efficient work wise for me and for usually people I have to hire or work with to work remotely. There's less distractions. There's less bullshit. I mean, maybe occasionally you get someone who's like a joker or whatever, but you can get that in an office full of people as well. So I don't know why they've been so hard. It's been it hasn't caught on more of that.
Well, I think we need to push that hard because, if you're home, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden your family's way safer than when you're not home.
Yeah. I'm here. I'm working at home. I can take the kids to school and I go back to work and I do all that shit.
Well, but like your community is way safer when you're home. When there's a bunch of dudes home.
I just had to yell at and threaten some kids a couple hours ago. Sorry, we're going. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but every community, it used to be normative in working class communities. Like there'd be a couple guys who worked night shift, so they'd be home sleeping during the day. And if somebody, who wasn't from the neighborhood got rowdy, the lady who, my husband works nights, so he's home. What are you doing here? And then they'd be gone. There's stories that
it's like having a dog or something.
Right. Yeah. Well, the Dusky Brethren just wouldn't go into certain Irish or Italian neighborhoods in New York because they knew if they crossed, such and such a street, there'd be violence in the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Right. And those communities were destroyed via economic means and cultural means. But that's what happened. Like if you just didn't do, and the same obtained for Philadelphia or Baltimore even. And so, you could find a place in the middle of nowhere and try and make hobby farms and then work online, with Elon Musk Starlink. The world has reliable remote internet now for the first time ever, which is astonishing. The first step to solving any problem is being consciously aware of it. And I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers, but for you and your individual circumstances, if you understand that it's a problem, living, so much time in the car, far away from neighbors, all of that, your individual circumstances might change and you can do things to mitigate those or ameliorate those or solve those problems. And I can't give you a prescription of this is what you have to do. You have to show some agency and do it yourself. But I'm going to give you this broader perspective. It can be something as small as a bunch of bros go in on a home gym together, to something as large as like we're building a planned community in the middle of nowhere for, just our people, like Orania. You can do anything in between. But productive places last. New York City is productive because it's the best port on the east coast of the United States, right? Actually, the east coast of all of North America, really. And whatever happens in the future, it might shrink in population a bunch, but that core of the harbor will last, right? Because it's productive. Those farming villages near streams with a mill will last.
Yeah.
These suburban experiments where there's nothing for hundreds of miles and millions of acres of just bland, boring housing.
Well, most of them do have streams. They do have village potential. There's streams that are under the ground, have been covered up for the roads and things, and
well, they have village potential, but be looking to turn those places into villages. From a security point of view too, like a village is defensible. There's only 2 or 3 or 4 ways in. You can say, oh, you just post 3 or 4 guys at each intersection on the way into town and be like, hey, well, who are you? What are you doing here? The proverbial zombie apocalypse sort of thing happens. These are the sort of thing. Yeah. Suburbs are not.
It is like the polis idea, though. It is like partitioning things off into a regulated community of one kind or another, and
right.
Within the. So say if your polis expands and expands and expands, how do they deal with it in the past? I guess like before this concept of suburbia, what happened in Paris and London in the ancient days when things expanded and expanded? They just grew this, how did it work? That would be different. I guess they just wouldn't build obviously these cookie cutter. I mean, in some ways they kind of did. Go on. What?
Well, okay, so I'll give you an example.
Right.
Before there were bridges across the Thames, right?
Yep.
Everything was on the north side, and then slowly Southwark would be built, and you might take boats, you might not, but there'd be this iterative process. You might throw up a shack on the south side and farm the south side and just live on the south side, and you'd take your produce across in a boat, or once there's a bridge, right, open to like foot traffic and maybe a small farm cart, nothing huge, right? But you could take, right? So there's this iterative process, and maybe this land is productive enough for there's water for the Southwest United States has a severe drought problem. In 3 or 4 mega cities, Phoenix and Los Angeles, San Diego, Las Vegas, something's going to give down there. Right. So let's just use an example of those, right? So instead of building these gigantic sprawling suburban places with lots of golf courses and watching all this water just evaporate out of the sky, dumb and heartbreaking at the same time, right?
Golf, golf annoys me too. But anyways, I mean, it's not. I shouldn't have anything inherently against golf. It's fine, but like these golf courses, it is a real. How do you? It's a real sign of what, like
decadence,
suburban, a suburban class signaler, let's say.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it is very much. But let's just take this example of if you had in the Southwest United States like a decent source of water that would support, say, 20 houses. Okay. And this is going to be very important in the future, I think. Let's just say you find that. Instead of building a sprawl around that, you build a polis around that is defensible, that is compact, that is, not wasteful, right? You use your gray water to water the lawn, right? You use you be efficient with it.
Okay, well, let's just imagine that's great, but it must become a point I would expect. Say when that polis, say it becomes the next Silicon Valley, everyone wants to go there. Jobs are being generated for whatever reason. This seems to happen, right? That you need to build around it. There would be then, because I've seen city planning, ancient city planning for expansion and stuff.
Yeah.
Vitruvius,
talks
yeah,
about
and other things. Yeah, it just wouldn't. The solution wouldn't be to create a fucking wasteland of cookie cutter houses and this
yeah.
kind of with no
Well, so
cultural or aesthetic consideration, or
right.
you would
So the
build.
Romans.
Yeah,
So
right.
Vitruvius. I'm terrible at
Vitruvius, yeah,
pronouncing
Vitruvius,
Vitruvius, right? So Vitruvius, in the Romans, right? They would find a spot, say, okay, this spot, there's a good spot for a mill here, so we're gonna put a
yeah,
mill up,
yeah,
and we're gonna, it's off the main road, 500 stadia. There's this good spot for a mill,
yeah.
and it's off the main road far enough that we could actually farm this surrounding countryside. 500 stadia is not that bad a distance. So we're going to put up a mill here, and we're going to set up a farming village, and we're going to, but we're not going to bother to set up, farm between this village, this new village, and this other spot. We're going to leave it because, the forest in between provides hunting and woods for cooking and further construction and whatever else.
My grandfather in Cornwall used to manage a wood for a rich lady. It sounded like such an excellent job, and he would manage the bees and sort of like take down the trees that needed to come down and like lumber it up and all this kind of thing. It was it's great the idea of having a wood and seeing it not as a nuisance but as a resource that it is, and just managing it and getting jobs out of it and using it.
And
that would be part of it,
and passing it on, right? Because that wood had been managed for 1,000 years, or more, right? That wood had been, depending on how crazy you want to get, right? Like the Cornish have been mining tin for 3,000 years.
Yeah. Are they still?
Right?
I'm not sure actually, but they was a big tin thing.
Yeah, right. But like, so people have been taking resources out of Cornwall for a long time, and no mine survives without wooden, a vast amount of wood for tools and supports and fires for the guys cooking and whatever else. So this wood had been managed for a long time prior to your grandfather inheriting that position.
Mm-hmm.
And he managed it such that he would pass it on to the next generation. And I think that the biggest thing that we need to do, and your art books talks about this, is be conscious of the mind virus that you've been fed, whether it's the modern art or the modern architecture. Like, no one is saying.
I was really curious about what you were going to say there. I distracted you by saying about my grandfather in the wood, that you were talking about Vitruvius's plans for basically a suburb, I think.
Right. Well, so they would recognize that things were getting too crowded in some city X, right? And so they'd hive off Dunbar's number worth of people and go find a new site and build on that site, and they'd find a productive spot. Right. And it would have certain characteristics. Like, it would have enough land to farm on, and it would have enough water to be able to be usable, and it would be defensible, and it would be, close enough to town so that when you needed things that only town could provide, you could go to those places, for the yearly festivals or whatever, for your religious obligations, to fill you would consciously find those places.
Right.
And one of the things that's awful about suburbs is the blandification of everything. And it levels
practical planification, and practical only in terms of the car. Here's your house where you can quickly and easily you can get into your job in town.
Right.
And that's it. There's nothing else.
by leveling and unifying the landscape, I'm struggling to find the correct term here, but by making the landscape so monotonous, right?
Yeah.
It destroys the potentiality. Might be there, or might have been there underneath, but it's been plowed over. It's been flattened. It's been had. Well,
there's culture. Even the term culture, I think, used to originally refer to things like farms. When you see like a tilled field, there's something cultural going on there. Like to have a resource that's
Cultivate.
local being used,
Right.
you know, if it's just like a place you go as a stopgap, traveling back and forth, and has no other purpose, and it's not really a home, because half your home and most of your day is spent in the town, I guess, as well, right? And then you go
Yeah.
back, kind of thing. At least, you know, for at least one or two members of the family, and so you're never fully connected in the. You have to, you can't put proper roots down, probably, and you should
No, you can't.
be able to see things like farms and churches and what else would be like a true sign you're in a cultural thing, more like a village than a suburb. You know,
A local pub.
a local pub, yeah. And
Well,
just
no,
like an obscure, even if it's goofy and retarded, but some kind of like sign of a unique parochial culture
right.
that's different from the other borough, you know, or anything, and different from anywhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it used to be once upon a time, right, that houses in Antrim were different than houses in Cork. Maybe slightly different.
Yeah. Yeah, in a unique way, not some like the way it is now, where it's like some modern design thing. Yeah,
right. Where they're just all the same and they're all hideous and they're all.
It's always the same thing. It's
soulless.
always like if they're really edgy, they'll do like I don't know how do you describe it. It'd be some boxy thing, but like there's an
like
offset
a pseudo
window.
flankoid light without his talent.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, not even that. Not even as good as that. Just sort of like a box, but the window will be off, like in an off-putting weird place, or like, you know, there'll be some bizarre shape over the doorway. I don't know.
Yeah,
And
it's
like,
terrible.
that's when that's when they feel they're really arty. You know, that's the rare kind of person. Like, so the more average type I think just takes whatever they're given. I don't know.
Right.
But in both cases, you know, it's very rare to find someone who considers, well, maybe not, because there are appreciators of beauty and of traditional architecture. I seem to encounter a lot of them.
Well, you're the sort of.
But I guess nothing is provided for them. There's no option for them, so no one ever
no.
makes anything for them. And the excuse is usually given is that it's too expensive, or
right.
I don't know, you know.
But and on the one hand, the people that will claim it's too expensive will also be like just endlessly kvetch about climate change. Well, like, what's worse? You know, you take this gypsum board from like somewhere, you know, a mine somewhere else in, you know, the Americas, and you know, process it and send it across the ocean or whatever. Or like you could just take a local stone out of a field. You know, you got to take the stones out of the field anyway to be able to use the field as a field to grow potatoes or grow wheat or grow barley or grow whatever. Right.
Yeah.
So you take the stones out of the field and then you build your barn out of the stones. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, some of the stone in this building I'm in, I bought stone for most of it, but up towards the when I got to the gables, I ran out and I just went out into the hills and like grabbed stones and used them.
There you go.
But literally,
awesome.
Everything I built this with, I could have potentially got from local materials. It's all I would need is a lime kiln. There's a lot of roads here still named Lime Kiln Road, which is where it was such. There's many of them, so it shows you that there was once a lime kiln, you know, in every you know area, in every few blocks, it would have been a lime kiln. And you just take the limestone and you burn it until it turns into a powder, and you mix it with water, and then you basically got your mortar, right? And then you take the rocks out of the ground, like I did for the gables and everything else, and the wood. You just obviously chop down the trees, and everything's there. Everything's there in the ground, right in front of you, that you need. You don't need things imported from fucking China or Brazil or anywhere else.
Right.
So everyone remember that.
Yes.
And I think we should shut it down soon. What do you think? I hear my kids acting up in the background. It's like an hour and 41.
No,
if you have a conclusion, you can wrap the bow on your evils of suburbia.
I just want to a couple things. These are unproductive places put together by people that are hostile to you. You've been driven there by other hostile elements. You know, do what you can to make your places productive, and reclaim some of your personal sovereignty, some of your happiness, wealth back, all of that. You know, if I'm on Telegram at you know, you can follow me there. They've got a lot of writing about this sort of stuff, and there's lots of books available if there's something that you're more interested in learning more about.
I'm not sure if I added your Telegram in the description. Did I? I hope I did. If not, I will after this. I'll look. I'll go
anyway.
and try it.
But I want to second. I follow all of Brendan's channels because I think the aesthetics are so important. And one of the things I hate about the suburbia is the aesthetics are awful, and they're deliberately awful. And so, you know, the arguments, you're not going to be able to convince someone who thinks that we should transition 9-year-olds. That's not something that rationally can be argued, but you can show people like the demon-looking weirdo who's trying to do that to a 9-year-old, and you can show them like a Frank Frazetta painting, and you can say, which one do you think would be better? Like, and I think that because we're so bland and so blasé, something that has to be visceral. It has to have like this, you know, Mighty Rages and Black Depressions kind of pulp aesthetic that Brendan pushes so well, that you have to reach people with big emotions. And
yeah.
And I think that's
great. That's great. You know, I still get flack from people that don't get when you say you mentioned Frank Frazetta there. Like, I still get a lot of people that like, and the pulp stuff and things like that, that can't associate that with a high art. They think that's a bad move to go that, you know. And but again, I find those people are often associated with the distracting, energy sucking vampire, possible psyop people.
Yeah.
So maybe maybe they were all along trying to do that, because I believe there's a link. Like when I post Brigitte Bardot or muscle cars or heavy metal, and then I, you know, right after that there's Caravaggio or whatever. To me, there is a link between these things, although it can be tenuous at times, I admit. But I don't know. I'm not even sure how to describe it. But
well, Caravaggio was the Frank Frazetta of his day. That's what people got to understand, right? Like.
Well, you can say Frank Frazetta was very much professionally involved with comics and pulp and stuff, and arguably he, you know, you can't really compare him to, you know, Rembrandt and Turner, let's say, but he's still very good in there is in the allowable culture of I always think of that era as a sort of post-psychedelic age, in the original pulp era and the stuff that was going on in the post-60s through the 80s. Again, the fiction and the art was very influenced, I think, by the 60s. The good part of the 60s was the experimentation with mind-altering hallucinogenics. Now, I know this is not very a right-wing attitude for many people, but this is my feeling on it, that there was a certain consciousness expansion that went on then. And despite it being... It's true, you might say Frank Frazetta is more juvenile than the great masters and so forth, and that's fine. But it is like a world unto itself, and it also very inspirational and aesthetically profound in its own peculiar way, as are many things from the only thing that's really off limits for me is when something's really truly conformist and corporate, and you can tell it's decided by committee, like one of these modern Star Wars movies, or one of these, like, you know, the kind of culture where you can just tell it's total fabrication. So I don't mind a little bit of sleaze and cult movie stuff and all this. I mean, in fact, I love it, but it's got to be done in a certain spirit. It's very hard to describe.
Well, the muses speak to a particular person. They spoke to George Lucas. They'll speak to George Romero. They'll speak to Frank Frazetta. They'll speak to Robert E. Howard, and they don't speak to committees. And so
no. So sorry, we distracted from your summary there again. I don't know if you had
I just want to encourage people to well, and I'll end with this, right? Like,
okay,
no one ever like looked on a suburb and like produced a great art out of that, of like, this is so inspiring. Like, people looked at maybe you know, Robbie Burns' To a Wee Mousy, right? He saw a field and wrote To a Wee Mousy, which is great art. And people have seen great buildings and made great art. So find the sorts of things and places that, you know, are inspiring and worthwhile places, and pursue that for yourself. And you know, and if you've got to be like juvenile and like think about like hot cars and cool chicks or whatever,
or maybe like
that's at least something that's real.
Yeah,
at least pursue the real.
At least they had beauty in mind when they made
Yeah.
Those old Mustangs and, or Frank Frazetta, they very much just had beauty in mind, let's say.
Yeah.
Even if, they weren't trying to be pretentious, the pretentiousness of the moderns with their,
right.
I built this shitty fucking box because I'm so arty. And it's like,
like I'm deliberately presenting ugliness as a rebellion against beauty. Like, no, dude, just like show me like a curvy blonde chick. Like at least God made that beautiful. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
we like it.
like,
one of the greatest quotes is what's that guy? Oh shit, what's his name? Robert Williams. You know that artist? He did he does kind of sort of pulpy-ish stuff. I haven't heard about him for a long. He used to be the editor of Juxtapose magazine. On the inside, he did the illustration on the inside of Guns N' Roses' first album with like the robot that's
yeah.
You know this guy?
Right. I know Guns N' Roses' first album. Yeah.
Yeah, so he that's kind of art he does. And he was interviewed by some like pretentious modern art type person, and he's like, I remember his exact quote was like, I think a woman's ass is more beautiful than the constellations you see in the universe, or compared to all these things. And it's like, well, Robert, yeah, I mean, you got a point.
It certainly does. Certainly does.
But well, I mean, we're digressing. I mean, I'm making a joke. I mean, I don't want us to seem. That's the weird. This is the trouble I have. Is like to certain people that only see things through a certain lens. Now we've digressed into sort of a lowbrow argument for all these highbrow things we'd previously be talking about. But I don't see it that way, and that's something I really have to work at thinking about how best to describe how that works. So to avoid that trap, because I think I don't know. Those things are all linked, and there should be.
They are all linked, and the high and the low together create a culture, right? Like no one, there's
like I don't personally think a woman's ass is more beautiful than the scenes of the Hubble telescope. Like obviously that's like vast spiritual. I mean, it's funny quote from Robert, but you can see his point as well. It is very
it depends on the woman. It depends on the
yeah. Well, he's talking about the best of the best, obviously. And it's like, well, yeah.
Well, right. Well, and is it more beautiful than anything by IMK?
I mean, I just absolutely. I appreciate that honesty, and like you know what he's talking about. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay, he's not pretentious. He's not talking some fucking bullshit.
Yep, absolutely. And I want to say thank you to both for having me on and for all of your good work. I as you can tell, I'm a fan, and I do believe that sanity has to be restored through some if we can't get something as basic as if I may quote myself, like Frank Frazetta and Boris Vallejo ought to be awesome. Ought to be like the normative, because
they should have been designing like public monuments or something, probably, or
right. Like, but I put it up on my Telegram channel, right? Like men should be like, if you should strive to have mighty thews and carry a big huge sword and like wear a crown and have a bunch of gold around you and hot chicks, and women should be like thick and mysterious. And
it's natural. It's perfectly natural.
It's normal and sane, right? And we have this idea that like this bland conformist leveling should be the norm, and it's not. It all the real diversity in the world of all the different peoples and cultures and styles and mediums and should all just be the same. It's a vile corruption brought about by modern art. And
yeah, so that's it. It's true. It's all true.
And I better go inside, I think. So thanks a lot for coming on. Great talking to you. We'll do it again sometime. We'll think of another subject that's close to your heart. Because I mean, that was great. It was a good talk. Yeah, suburbs are evil. Everyone knows it. We have told you why they are evil. So I'll say goodbye, and I'll be in touch with you. And goodbye, everybody. Have a good, what is it, Sunday? Yes, Sunday. Have a good Sunday. Goodbye.